We all have that realization at one point or another where we decide that something is just not for us. This could apply to just about anything. But sometimes it's not as definitive as we make it out to be because at one point or another we may end up coming back to it, giving it another chance. I've been like that with card games throughout my life. It's a genre I've watched and have taken light interest in growing up, with little exposure to the trading card scene or some of the family board games that a lot of people get exposed to. But when I took my own plunge, it didn't last long, and I left with mixed feelings about it all. Me personally, I've always been accustomed to forms of media that emulate the shapes and sizes of the world, rather than having them downsized into a card to play on a board. I loved the frequent engagement of shooters, the eye candy of open world fantasy games, or the deep mechanics of strategy games. But card games was something I hadn't engaged with much in comparison, and at one point I eventually concluded that it wasn't meant for me. At least that's what I believed at the time anyways. Throughout life, we have a habit of giving multiple chances towards things that we really do want to like, but would get discouraged due to bad experiences with them. This can be especially true in the trading card game scene, where the games are an infinite rabbit hole of ever-expanding cards and complex mechanics like you'd see in Magic. The pricing aspects and the overwhelming nature of the games ultimately deterred me from it earlier on, especially when I wasn't making any money myself. But I've always liked the idea of getting into them, and still do. But one game that is universally known, and one that your mum and dad more than likely have played religiously while you weren't noticing, would finally be the catalyst to invite me into the world of card games, without it just being a feigning interest that I would forget over time, and that is Solitaire. Solitaire is one of the most well-known games across the world. It might even be the first card game that comes to mind because of its widespread influence throughout its existence, in both physical and digital spaces. The origins for playing cards can be traced all the way back to earlier times in history, where people would play Solitaire, or patience games as it's known in other countries, to pass the time. But as of today, it's on everyone's computer, and it's free. It's simple and intuitive rules, made for quick and rapid games where the rules themselves were comprehensible enough to follow even on your first game of Klondike or Spider or Free Cell or any other game that fits under the Solitaire category. It's one of those games where you'll have definitely heard of it, even if you've never touched it in your life. For me, I've known it in the guise of Microsoft Solitaire, which after many iterations is now 34 years old as of this year, and is still going. Throughout the majority of my life in gaming, I went for games that had a lot more to see and do. The idea of having cards on a board seemed kind of boring to me, and the presence of so many other titles that offered fantastical worlds, in full 3D mind you, didn't help this case. But card games, as I've come to discover over time, have an intrinsic bond throughout all of our periods in life in one way or another. Even if I wasn't the biggest card game fan, I do have memories of some of them. I remember my brother's friends coming over when I was a kid, and they would lay out their Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon TCG cards, creating their own field on the driveway, and they would do duels with the decks that they created. Or there would be other times where when my brother would be at school, I would sneak into his room and take the box just to look at all of his cards. I had no idea what was going on while these games were being played, and I only just watched, and I had no idea about the significance of said cards. But I remember how fun they looked, the social engagement that the games had engineered, the memorable designs of said cards, with their own backstories and abilities, made for memorable stories to tell in the physical realm of Yu-Gi-Oh! As well as Pokemon or any other TCG that you can think of. These experiences can also be found in lots of other card games and not just TCGs. In fact, there's also living card games like Dominion or Arkham Horror, where it encourages bringing people together in the same way and enjoying the game as one. These are some of the most social multiplayer experiences that I have seen and experienced, next to the fighting game community and custom role-playing servers in other popular multiplayer games. But where does Solitaire come in for me? Well, the effect is different because it's a game that can be played on your own. Lots of card games or board games are generally designed to be played with other people, but Solitaire doesn't need other players, just someone to play it. The game is free, and if you have playing cards already, then you can set it up immediately. It's highly flexible in how you approach it. It can be played on your phone or on your computer, or outside when you're sitting down with a cup of coffee. It has the potential to create a social space where you may find like-minded people to join, in the same way how people organize chess games out in parks. But Solitaire fulfills a time kill period that's stimulating and oddly fun, way more than I expected. Like I had said before, decisions on something not being for you is not always definitive. In fact, you may have just been in a bad mood, or you picked the wrong game to start with. When I finally tapped into digital card games though, or TCGs in digital form, I had tried Hearthstone back when it was relatively new. I still wasn't a huge card fan then, but to my surprise, I somehow ended up really enjoying it. I loved the clean UI, the vibrant colors and the art style, as well as the music of the game. It made me feel like I was in Lion's Pride Inn or Tavern in the Mist while playing cards with endless chatter and cups clashing in the background. I didn't play the game for that long because at the time, the monetization aspect of it had kind of put me off. I had assumed that at the time you had to fork more cash just to stand a chance should you choose to get more competitive. I don't know if it's like that now since it's been so long and I haven't really kept tabs on Hearthstone, but I hope I'm wrong on the matter because at the time I thought it was a really good game. Eventually though, I would stumble upon another collectible card game, or CCGs, that's criminally underrated, called Infinity Wars. Again, I had liked the art style of the game, the range of cards that had a mix of both fantasy and sci-fi blending together, and how it also had PvE based content in order to get more familiar and comfortable with the game. Something that I had delved into for a while. Nowadays though, it's known as Infinity Wars Classic, and based from its description, you can obtain all the cards in the game without having to pay for money. As for the original game though, that was years ago when I had played it sometime after 2014, and I haven't touched a CCG game since. But over those years, I would keep tabs on some card games, or would entertain the idea of getting into some of them, but it never happened. I would get occupied with other parts of life or other types of games, and like a donut, I would come across a pack of cards, appearing as Microsoft Solitaire. After I'd moved on from Vampire Survivors, I was bored on a Monday morning, casually strolling through the Xbox Game Pass or just my Steam library. The thought of trying a card game had crossed my mind earlier because I didn't really want to play another boring boomer shooter game or another janky Souls-like. I just wanted something different. And of all games to start with, Solitaire was the game to refuel my engine once more. I've always been mood driven with games. There's a lot that I want to play but can never muster the mood to get into. And it doesn't get easier as you get older because you begin to recognize the importance of using your time for other things and you have to balance things out more often. When I was younger, I could bury myself in games like RuneScape and World of Warcraft. But now it has to be a conscious decision whenever I do that, where I have to police my use of time. However, I don't have to do that with Solitaire games because they're quick and easy to pick up, with a dynamic range of difficulties that makes each session different, at least in terms of what cards you end up with anyways. As I've continued playing Solitaire, I wouldn't fret too much over losing. If I was up shit creek and had no moves to make, I would just accept the loss and quickly move on to the next game. Rinse and repeat. And for the most part, luck plays a factor in games like Klondike and Spider, whereas Free Cell and other types of Solitaire-like games have a little bit more skill involved. But it's not like I'm playing Magic the Gathering where I have to cram 3 decades worth of knowledge of rules. The rules for each game in Solitaire is relatively simple to follow, and you have everything you need to play through it. Lots of games fiddle too much of rules where it becomes more of a headache. It's why it's so difficult for some people to get into TCGs like Magic or TCGs in general because of the variety of game types and rules that they have. But Solitaire doesn't have any of those problems. The easy transition into playing the games as if I've been playing them the whole time is part of why Solitaire is so well known and played by so many because of how easy it is to get into. Of course though, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're better than the TCGs or the other types of card games. Solitaire just happened to be the right game to finally convince me over into the card space. All different card games offer different flavors and appeal to different mindsets. People play TCGs for near infinite replayability, a constant flow of new decks and packs coming out keeping the games fresh, or keeping the combo chain higher. But beyond that, it's also the near endless pool of strategies and synergies that the cards can present and combine with. But the most important part of it is the community surrounding it, keeping the games alive through tournaments or matches in card shops. Solitaire, on the other hand, though, is pretty simple and it fulfills a unique purpose. A purpose that isn't so much for social stimulation, but rather just, moderate mental stimulation, I would say. anyone in fact can get into these games, quite literally, since it's free. Starting simple for me was what ultimately won me over and carried me across the sea of cards. Now I can appreciate what the other type of card games offer. The catalyst that was Solitaire moved me across the playing card realm into other fields, most notably the roguelike deck builder realm. It's a genre that's been pretty popular on Steam for the past couple of years, with Slay the Spire creating a floodgate of them. These games have tons of replayability and depth. Some even have workshop integration like Slay the Spire, and is yours forever with one purchase. The people that look for replayable and complex card games don't always want a financial rabbit hole or multiplayer sessions with an infinite pool of anonymous opponents with OP decks. They just want a well-curated and replayable single-player experience. Games like Slay the Spire or Monster Train or Ring of Pain offer that in spades. I've tried a few smaller games in this genre of card games, with some even being dice rollers like Slice and Dice, another fun turn-based game where you have characters that can take actions based on what you get from the dice roll. The complete exposure to card games also created an interest in dice building games, which are an offshoot of deck building games, and sometimes the genres blend together. The point here is that when you get hooked on a game, you start to look outward for other experiences that are similar to it. It was like when I got hooked on the Souls games, I searched far and wide for other games similar to them. Since Solitaire, I've essentially been doing the same thing, but I've been looking for different types of games rather than something that's exactly like Solitaire. And so far, it's been a slow and enjoyable journey, and it's also gotten me to think about what else people look for in games, as well as physical-based ones that offer unique experiences that the digital realm can't provide. Sure, you may make lifelong friends online, it's been done time and time again across different games, but the presence of other people playing the game with you, reading their gesture, their tone and expressions, is something that you cannot get in a game like Counter-Strike or any other competitive online game. A game that your parents have most likely played in their spare time is the game that got me into card games fully. In the past, I would visit them and, I would try them out for a bit, but they would never hook me in. Everyone has their genesis period with certain forms of media or certain genres in other forms of media. This was mine when it came to card games. They can be puzzling, strategic, endlessly replayable, and most importantly, accessible. Some, like Magic though, require a lot more from you, and having friends that are already into it really does help. But there are always other avenues that you can explore first, where their experiences can make you circle back to more complex and challenging card games like Magic. It's not unlike how other genres have easier starting points. You find the game that is welcoming and fun, rather than the one that is a puzzle or an exam to pass just to be able to enjoy it. Solitaire is simple and fun, and there's multiple variants and modified versions to play if it ever gets too stale. Challenge, pricing, and social barriers can be factors that can make or break your experience depending on what card games you're looking into. TCGs are fantastic if you have a social circle or a local community that engages with it, or you just really appreciate the deep mechanics as well as the endless pool of cards. LCGs are great if you want a TCG-centric experience, but where everyone's on the same page and has the same decks. Playing cards are dynamic in their environment and game styles, going from the spectrum of passing time to making money. Some collect, content with just hoarding a collection with pretty cards, like some in the TCG community where they just collect rather than play. Some treat it like the stock market, watching card prices shift and treating valuable cards like a princess. But for me, I've been slowly gravitating towards the roguelike deck building scene, naturally due to my preference in single player experiences. So far, that's been my experience of rediscovering a genre that I've ignored for a long time, finally coming full circle to it. I really do try to give different things a chance, and sometimes it just doesn't work. But there can be other reasons for that as well, and when you apply the right game, it can be the persuasive element to win you over, where you can see the light, so to speak. Experiences come and go, and there are some amazing things that I have definitely missed out on. The younger me would regret it and lament over the fact that I missed out on it when the opportunity was there, but the older me doesn't give a shit because you aren't meant to experience everything anyways. However, card games are endless, and there's always time for a quick round of Spider or Free Cell or whatever card game that you get trapped into. As someone that still doesn't have a lot of experience with card games, they've certainly had an impact on my life. Breaking through to the other side though, where I was playing and not just watching, was what also allowed me to look retrospectively to my younger days up until now and having a much deeper appreciation for what card games do. If I delve deeper into this dimension of cards without getting negated or losing interest, then I may cover some of these games in the future. Either way, time will tell. In the meantime though, I'll definitely be doing more rounds of Solitaire when I have a few minutes to kill, and having fun doing it, which is all that matters in the end, having fun with what you're playing. Stay tuned, and thank you for watching.
Speak thee the name of God, thine own God, if thou canst recall. Ah, then thou'st not forgotten. Perhaps 'tis why we may converse. I am known as Shira, servant to the Princess Anor, matriarch of the church, their fee.